Before we dive into this gripping tale, hit that subscribe button on our channel and drop a like if you enjoy edge-of-your-seat true crime stories. It helps us bring you more chilling content, cowardly and pathetic. That's how experts will characterize him, trying to compile a behavioral profile. A customer who entered this ceramic store today made a horrific discovery. His targets are young female employees of small stores. A pistol, the back of the head, pulling the trigger. A shoe store in Indianapolis, a ceramic store in Terre Haute, a bridal salon in Wichita, a herbal medicine store near Kansas City, another shoe store near St. Louis. All these are places of attacks. No fingerprints, no traces, no DNA. Only one frightening detail: casings covered with rouge. His personal signature. The last known transaction in the store occurred at 12 noon yesterday. This person bought a pair of men's and a pair of women's shoes. 3 victims. Fourth, soon detectives notice a pattern. All crimes occur along Interstate 70. And judging by the scheme of all 6 crimes, we are likely to see new attacks along the 70th Interstate Highway. But there are no leads. The killer is like a ghost. Time passes. Crimes sometimes subside, sometimes flare up with renewed vigor. More than 29 years have passed, but the case of the I-70 shooter remains unsolved. One of the keys to solving this case is the work of the investigative team. 29 years pass and suddenly a breakthrough. He kept several states in fear, acted lightning fast, and disappeared without a trace. But now, surveillance cameras capture his attack for the first time. The Terre Haute Police Department, Indiana, needs your help to find the cold-blooded shooter whose brutal act was captured on music camera. April 11, 1992, Saturday, pleasant spring evening. Mark Majors has the day off today. He is preparing dinner, waiting for his wife from work. The man wanted to go with his wife to their store, a shared family business selling wedding dresses, accessories, and renting tuxedos, to help her. But Trish said she could handle it. Finishing up in the kitchen, Mark sets the table, lights candles, softly humming the melody under which everything once began. Seeing in the hall the tall, slender, and graceful Patricia, whom everyone calls exclusively Trish, Majors immediately decided to invite her. He asked if she knew swing, if she would like to be his partner. And the girl replied, yes. The dance, however, ended somewhat comically and very quickly. Right after Mike first spun and twisted his partner to the side, she simply flew off and fell to the floor. After that, the excited guy ran up and said, "You said you could." The new acquaintance didn't even let him finish, but just laughed and said, "I thought I could." Only after their wedding did Mark learn from Trisha's friend that on that evening, the girl decided on the adventure because she immediately realized he was her future husband. And the couple really hadn't been apart since then. Not for a day. They created a family, moved to the city of Wichita, Kansas, opened a joint business, and live in perfect harmony, already thinking about having a child. Amid pleasant thoughts and chores, Mark doesn't notice that his wife is late. However, around 7:30 he starts to get nervous. Dinner has long gone cold, and she's still not there. The man extinguishes the candles, gets into his car, and drives to their store. Maybe clients came right at closing needing to buy outfits urgently. Trish definitely wouldn't refuse the lovers. However, on the approach to the place, Mark is met by the lights of police cars. Something has happened. Mr. Majors sees the tape that the cops have used to cordon off the perimeter and realizes that something terrible has occurred. The man tries to pass through it, but officers stop him. He shouts and demands to be let through. This is his store. Trish is there, but the patrol just puts him in their car and asks him to wait. Mark complies, but after 5 minutes of pointless waiting, his nerves give out, or they tell him honestly what's going on there, or there will be a fight. He won't tolerate it anymore, realizing they're only making it worse. The law enforcement officers say that there was a shooting in the store. They received a call from a salon client who came here to pick something up but found a stranger with a pistol. 9/11. I was at the Cernai in the tuxedo store, and there was a man walking with a pistol with something like an Uzi. White male. This man had been here earlier, the day before on Friday. He rented a tuxedo, and his fiancée picked out a dress. but he forgot his cummerbund, a special belt, and called the store asking to wait for him a bit after closing. Mrs. Majors, Mark's wife, died at the scene. Patricia Smith, the saleswoman, taken to the hospital in critical condition. Chances for a positive outcome are extremely low. Her pulse was barely palpable when they took the unfortunate woman away. Both women were shot in the back of the head by an unknown person, whom Trish apparently mistook for that very client they were waiting for and let inside. After all, she wasn't in the salon yesterday and couldn't know what the forgetful groom looked like. When Miss Smith's relatives arrive at the clinic, they learn that the girl has also left this world. They didn't make it. When two families at once, those of the deceased Patricia Smith and Trish Majors, face grief and try to comprehend and embrace it, the police are forced to simply do their job. Although, undoubtedly, none of the cops, even the experienced ones, expected that something like this could happen here. While criminologists examine the crime scene, officers talk to that very client who came to the store for the cummerbund but came face to face with the criminal. The man says he approached the window and looked inside but saw no one. Then he knocked on the door several times. There was no reaction, although the light in the room was on. Pressing the handle just to make sure it was locked, the visitor discovered it wasn't, opened it, and entered. At that very moment, a stranger with a pistol in his hands jumped out at him. Very nervous, somewhat frightened, he started shouting and demanding that the buyer go to the back room. Supposedly, that way the villain would be sure he could leave from here and know that no one would see in which direction he went. Obviously, the client didn't behave at all as the criminal expected. The man refused to go where he was told and started persuading the psychotic bandit that what was happening in this store didn't concern him at all. Like, "Go, guy, I won't tell anyone." The unknown with the weapon didn't give in to persuasion right away, but in the end, he preferred not to approach the visitor on his way to the exit, but instead told him to leave the premises, which our witness, of course, did immediately. True, he didn't run away but went to find a phone to call the police. When the first patrol arrived at the scene, the store seemed empty. The criminal had already left it, taking the money from the cash register, which stood open. No one responded to the police shouts, so the officers proceeded deeper into the salon to the back room, where they discovered the two women who had been shot from behind in the back of the head. Patricia was already dead. However, her employee Patricia Smith was still clinging to life. The shot at her was not at point-blank range, obviously because the bullet entered at a slight angle and didn't cause immediate death. Nevertheless, the unfortunate woman's condition was critical. Weak pulse, but what strong hope it gives in such moments. The cops immediately called an ambulance, and soon she was taken to the hospital. However, their efforts were in vain. Patricia Smith also passed away. After talking to the salon client, officers canvassed the neighborhood. Maybe someone else stayed late at work or residents of nearby houses heard something or saw a suspicious person. Thanks to the witness, they have his description. White male, about 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 9 inches. Quite thin, even scrawny. Reddish hair, but not bright, closer to light brown. Gray or gray-blue eyes, hooded eyelids. Face somewhat sunken. Meanwhile, criminologists find .322 caliber casings in the back room. They look for other evidence and check the cash register, which the attacker possibly opened himself, if he didn't force one of the victims to do it. There's a chance the perpetrator left fingerprints. And there are indeed some traces, though it's not yet clear who they belong to. The very next day, the client who saw the criminal in the store is invited to the station to work with an artist. Goal: to create the most accurate composite sketch. The man comes, but first wants to talk to the investigator, as he remembered an important detail, as it seems to him. The perpetrator had an unusual pistol in his hands. Quite strange. He had seen something similar only in some action movie. The guy describes the weapon as a rifle, but with a very short barrel. Something like an Uzi, judging by the appearance and size of the design. But he can't say for sure. The detectives thank the young man, as this is indeed an important detail. Perhaps the item is rare. Then it makes sense to try to determine the specific model and search for the culprit among owners of such a gun. The composite portrait of the suspect turns out quite detailed. The witness says the resemblance is maximum. He remembers the shooter's face well. The police immediately distribute it through all local media. Phone calls and messages from citizens start coming in. Meanwhile, forensic experts issue a conclusion on the autopsy of Smith and Major's bodies. The first died from one shot, the second from two, since the first only seriously injured her but wasn't critical, which the shooter apparently realized and decided to finish off. But the main thing is, there are no signs that the attacker tried to take advantage of either woman or that they fought him. Not a single defensive wound. Scratches, abrasions, bruises. Nothing indicating that the victims tried to resist. That is, he simply entered the store, forced them to go to the back room, and shot each in the back of the head. Why? A small amount of money was missing from the cash register. One could assume it was just a robbery that went wrong. But if there are no signs of a fight on Smith, and the salon itself is in perfect order, then what actually could have gone so wrong that the robber had to shoot two people? It starts to seem to the detectives that the theft of the bills is actually just a cover. This guy wants to confuse them, but what then was his true motive? The relatives of the deceased are sure the women had no enemies. Mark Majors, co-owner of the bridal salon, recall, and husband of the deceased Trish, also mentioned that they rarely have large sums of cash in the register. And you won't see crowds of buyers here. That is, nothing indicates the possibility of getting good proceeds in such a place. But nearby there are many shops selling more popular goods in large quantities. And this information leads investigators to think that the pseudo-robber was not looking for profit, but for carnal pleasures. He chose a store where there is no crowd of people, and perhaps didn't expect that the salesgirl would not be alone, but with the owner of the point. Then it makes sense to assume that this is some kind of maniac and indeed everything went wrong. For example, the psychopath started harassing the woman, and the second appeared suddenly from the same back room. He panicked and decided to eliminate both so as not to leave witnesses to his villainy. It's unknown how close the law enforcement's guesses are to the truth. In any case, the guy needs to be found as soon as possible. Someone capable of doing this once won't stop on his own, but will look for new victims. However, the detectives are not confident that this case is the first. The tips coming from citizens do not lead to serious leads. So, perhaps the criminal is not local. To find out if something similar happened in neighboring cities or in the state as a whole, detectives send a query and information about the incident to NCIC, the National Crime Information Center for exchanging information about crimes and those who commit them between different law enforcement agencies and simply separate units. The response comes very quickly. There is a similar case. In Indianapolis, a young woman, also a saleswoman, was shot in the back of the head at her workplace just 3 days ago. The detectives on the case of the deaths of Patricia Smith and Trish Majors contact their colleagues from the city of Indianapolis in Indiana. They are indeed also looking for a stranger who shot the shoe store manager Robin Farrow on April 8th. That is literally 3 days before the Wichita incident. Robin wasn't supposed to work that date, but her colleague got sick, and the girl came out as a replacement. The place overall is not very busy, like the Majors bridal salon. Few buyers, and on weekdays even fewer. If someone drops in, it's lucky. Fuldauer was tidying the shelves, serving rare visitors, went to the Speedway gas station located nearby during her lunch break. Everything as usual, but just half an hour later, the director calls her at the store, and no one picks up. The man dials the number again and again after 5 minutes, 10, half an hour. Silence. This is simply impossible unless something happened to Robin. The manager didn't even think that the worker could have left her workplace arbitrarily. She has been working here for a long time, and everyone knows how responsible and serious the girl is. Therefore, he calls the Speedway gas station and asks their employee to drop by Fuldauer and check if everything is okay. She immediately heads to Robin, and anxiety grips the woman as soon as she enters the store. Her acquaintance is nowhere to be seen. Doors open, cash register too. Calling Robin Fuldauer by name several times and getting no response. The gas station worker simply goes to the phone booth and dials the police number. Patrol officers arrive almost instantly. They inspect the store, go deeper into the premises. There's a storage room. The officer opens the door and simply gasps from surprise and fright. Robin is lying face down on the floor, and blood is flowing from the back of her head. The policeman checks the pulse. Dead. Nearby are .22 caliber casings. The unfortunate woman's clothes are in place. Nothing touched, no signs of struggle, assault, and so on. And if Wichita and here were operated by the same shooter, he is definitely not interested in girls as such. He craves blood. According to the forensic expert's conclusion, Miss Fuldauer died an hour and a half before she was found. Shortly before that, there was a customer in the store, and the police immediately turned to the media to find him as quickly as possible. The last known transaction in the store occurred at 1 p.m. yesterday. This person bought a pair of men's and a pair of women's shoes. Who this person is, we don't know, and he is definitely not a suspect at the moment. But we wanted to talk to him if he was in the store at that time. The man responded. He did buy shoes from Robin that day. Saw nothing and no one suspicious. The saleswoman behaved calmly and very kindly. As in the case of the Major's salon, everything looks like an unsuccessful robbery. Cash register open and about $90 was stolen from it. The Indianapolis police interview Robin's friends and family, trying to find a suspect or any clues as to why someone might want her dead. But the deceased was not in any relationships, didn't get into conflicts, no dubious friends or hobbies. When investigators from Wichita and Indianapolis discuss their cases and find so much similarity in the manner of committing the crime, they decide to send the casings found near the victims for ballistic examination and find out if they could have been fired from the same weapon. Given the likelihood that the police are dealing not just with a single case of shooting defenseless people, but probably a serial killer, experts work quickly. Everyone realizes how important it is to find him and stop him. Their conclusion is an absolute match. In both cases, the same weapon was used, not similar, not identical, the same. In addition, reddish traces of a substance are found on all casings, which are usually used not by gun owners, but by those who work with precious metals. Jeweler's rouge or rouge, a special tool for polishing, with which you can achieve a beautiful, clean shine. But why does the shooter need it? Well, the thing is, it contains stearin, which acts as a greasy binding element for other substances in the formula. This is such a bar that you can rub cartridges for use in weapons that periodically jam. I explained the technical side of the issue to you, and for the investigation, this is potentially weighty evidence because gunsmiths usually don't use such things. Also, detectives from Wichita and Indianapolis turned to profilers for help. Now they have two monstrously similar cases, and based on them, it will probably be easier to compile a profile of the alleged criminal. The experts don't delay with the answer. He is a coward, but at the same time, one can say, a representative of a completely unique cast of maniacs. The first conclusion suggests itself. The perpetrator attacks exclusively young women who are in secluded places and completely alone. Specialists are sure that Smith and Majors suffered together only because this individual did not know about the presence of the second inside the premises. Again, the male witness scared him so much that the madman didn't even dare to pass by him to the door due to his rather frail body constitution. And if we talk about the psychotype of this person, well, a rare specimen. The most horrific serial killers hunt not for the blood of their victims, but for their suffering, fear, pain, the feeling of their own power and omnipotence. Very unhealthy and cruel motives, undoubtedly, but the sought type is worse. He doesn't need emotions, tears, pleas for mercy. There is no physical, intimate motive in his crimes, as the detectives on the Smith and Majors case initially assumed. He doesn't give his victims even a chance to say something, because he wants only one thing: their death. And he gets high from the very moment of pulling the trigger and watching how life instantly leaves the body. For more than 2 weeks, the police distribute the composite sketch of the sought shooter through the media, process numerous citizen reports, check tips, and wait for a new strike, because maniacs don't stop on their own. But nothing happens. On April 27th, an attack on a man in Terre Haute, Indiana, becomes known. The victim died territorially close to Indianapolis. Well, investigators look in reports for cases where women were victims. However, soon their colleagues from this city contact them and report, this incident has every chance of being connected to the previous ones. The deceased Mick McCown temporarily worked in his mother's store. In life, he was a musician and traveled a lot with different groups. Music, but in recent years, Mick settled in his native Terre Haute. Parents are aging, it's hard for them to cope with work alone, so children's help is very welcome. Monday, the 27th, around 5 p.m., a call comes to 911. A local resident reports that he entered the dishware shop and discovered a body. A customer who entered this ceramic store today made a horrific discovery. Right by the window inside Sylvia's ceramic store lay the body of a man. Officers arriving at the scene find the dead man inside the store. Next to him is a spent casing from a .22 caliber pistol. The body's position indicates that Mick was on his knees in front of the lower shelves of the rack and arranging goods before collapsing to the floor after the shot to the back of the head. But the main thing is, McCown wore long hair, which he often tied in a ponytail, and the attacker could have mistaken him for a woman, which most likely happened. After all, the shooter didn't lead the guy to the back room or another remote room. It seems he decided it was a girl in front of him. And when he got close enough to realize it wasn't, he panicked and shot the unfortunate man on the spot. Another factor pointing to the serial killer who took the lives of Robin Fuldauer, Patricia Smith, and Trish Majors is the open cash register, from which only $50 disappeared. True, McCown has no wallet. Maybe he didn't have one. However, there is a possibility that the perpetrator took it, thinking that way his pseudo-robberies would look more believable. But we know that when bandits are interested in money, the risk of parting with life is quite low, because no thief wants to hang a corpse on himself unless the victim starts actively resisting. There was no struggle here. In the dishware store, not a single cup or plate was damaged. Everything is in its place. On Mick McCown's body, not a single bruise, abrasion, scratch, which means there was no need for a robber, if the attacker was one, to use a weapon. He came to get his high, to take a life. This time, besides the casing, officers find a clear boot print inside the premises and an identical one outside at the entrance. They immediately photograph them to be able to compare with the soles of the suspect's shoes when he is finally caught. The police interview people living nearby, trying to find a witness. But they simply couldn't see the criminal here. The store is next to the major highway I-70. The parking lot and entrance to the shop are also on the roadside, and citizens' houses are already behind the building. The casing from the crime scene is sent for ballistic examination. Detectives ask to compare it with those found in Wichita and Indianapolis. When the results come, it becomes clear that the cops have a 100% match again. Robin, Patricia, Trish, and Mick were shot by one person from the same weapon with absolutely identical cartridges. While the families of the deceased try to comprehend the fact that they lost their loved ones only because some psycho likes to shoot people in the back of the head, and the police search for the criminal, he strikes new blows. On May 3, 1992, in St. Charles, Missouri, 24-year-old Nancy Kitzmiller, a shoe store saleswoman, is found dead in the back room. The handwriting is the same. Shot to the back of the head, theft of a small amount of money from the cash register. A .22 caliber casing next to the body. A man working in another shop nearby saw her with the last visitor shortly before the girl's death. He helps make another composite sketch. And although there are differences between the previous version and the new one, it's obvious it's the same person, as the description and main features match. On May 7th, another victim becomes known in Raytown, Missouri. In the back room of the store of many colors, the body of its owner and saleswoman Sarah Blessing is found. Casing, open cash register, everything repeats. Panic in society grows. After 6 deaths, it becomes obvious that searching for the criminal among local residents of any of the cities where he operates is surely pointless. All incidents occurred along Interstate I-70 or small road segments that are its branches. It seems the maniac psychopath doesn't live here but travels for work and simultaneously looks for new places suitable for inconspicuously entering, leading the victim to the back room, shooting, and disappearing unnoticed. However, he also thought about what to do if someone notices him and chases. That's why all episodes happen so close to such a busy highway. Just get on it, and you'll be lost from sight in a maximum of 30 seconds. Crazy traffic, speed, no chance to catch up with the target. Shoe store in Indianapolis, ceramic store in Terre Haute, bridal salon in Wichita, herbal medicine store near Kansas City. another shoe store near St. Louis. All these are places of attacks. 6 victims, victims of whom the police in 4 states confidently consider a serial criminal who is still at large. And judging by the scheme of all 6 crimes, we are likely to see new attacks along the 70th Interstate Highway. The only thing that pleases, if in the context of this situation one can say so at all, in the case of Sarah Blessing there is also a witness. The owner of a TV repair workshop and video store next door noticed something strange that day. The man remembers he was working when someone appeared on the street in front of his window. He looked up and met eyes with a guy crossing the parking lot. Not very tall, up to 5 feet 9 inches. Light reddish closer to brown hair, scrawny, dressed in a gray jacket in such hot weather. Perhaps this detail attracted the master's attention. Although there was something else. The stranger stopped for a moment and stared intently into the witness's eyes. But after 5 seconds, he just went on as if nothing happened. Another 2 to 3 minutes later, the man heard a pop, like a shot. Definitely not some household sound. Being the owner of a .38 caliber weapon, the man grabbed it and flew out to the street like a bullet, but saw only how that very guy who stared at him from the parking lot turned the corner of the building. Fearing for Sarah, the witness headed to her store, started calling the girl. She didn't respond. And then the poor guy noticed legs sticking out from under the counter of the unfortunate woman. In less than 30 days, this maniac took the lives of 6 people in 5 places along Interstate I-70. The police are looking for him. Composite sketches are regularly shown on television, published in local newspapers. The series of tragic deaths stops as suddenly as it began. Weeks, months pass, nothing, silence. Is it possible that he just stopped? No one believes it. People in power wait for a new strike. To catch the unknown serial killer, law enforcement agencies from different jurisdictions unite and create a special task force that holds regular meetings, compares notes, case details, checks received tips. The FBI is also involved because it's already too obvious that detectives can't do without its help. The feds managed to compile a list of 8 different types of firearms that could have been used by the criminal, based on the caliber size and ballistic examination results. 5 of them detectives exclude immediately for one simple reason: the specified models do not eject casings. 3 options remain, and these are semi-automatic pistols that externally indeed more resemble a sawn-off rifle. With this list, detectives turn again to the witness from Wichita, that very groom who came for the cummerbund but ended up in the center of the crime scene. They show him photos, and the man without a shadow of doubt points to the Irma Werka ET-22. He well remembered the beautiful wooden grip, which other guns don't have and can't have. This is a German naval semi-automatic pistol that has more collectible value than practical. And yes, its biggest problem is precisely that it can jam at any moment and simply won't fire. That's why the shooter used Jeweler's Rouge and bothered so much. All law enforcement agencies and the task force begin searching for such an unusual weapon. In total, about 6,000 units of Irma Werka were imported from Germany at the time. How many are in the USA now, it's hard to say for sure. But the authorities aren't looking for all owners of such a toy. They are more interested in people who live in the territory around the zone where those very 6 attacks of the shooter occurred. The logic is this: if his activity is concentrated along a specific highway, then he lives somewhere nearby, even if not in one of the cities where 5 girls and Mick McCown died from his hands. Searches are conducted not only among longtime owners, they also check citizens who were noticed buying Irma Werka after the death of the last known victim at gun shows and such. Conscientious collectors register their purchases, even if they keep them behind glass for years. Accordingly, if the maniac decided to sell the evidence against himself, the chances of finding him through the buyer would be quite high. And the cops actually have reason to believe that the sought villain could have sold the gun and illegally acquired something new. Because in 1993 in Texas, 2 more young women, also saleswomen, die. The unknown shot each in the back of the head from a .22 caliber weapon, stole a little money from the cash register, and so on. But ballistic examination of the bullets extracted after autopsy shows that a different pistol was used. Although everything else indicates it's the same guy. Only now he doesn't leave casings behind. While law enforcement agencies work hard on searching for the psycho shooter, Investigators ask the families and friends of the victims to continue spreading information in the media. She will never find peace, at least in my mind, until this person is punished. After any interview with any family member of the victims, the number of new tips from citizens always increases. Every signal is a chance that cannot be ignored. However, the authorities' efforts do not lead to revealing the criminal's identity, and new victims appear. In 1994, Vicky Webb is attacked, the owner of a small business in Houston, Texas, a souvenir store. In the morning of January 15th, a customer enters her store. He looks at the windows, asks questions, at some point starts talking about an upcoming meeting with his niece. Then the visitor points to a photo frame that he supposedly wants to buy. Vicky Webb takes it and heads to the cash register when suddenly she hears a shot and falls. She is wounded. Next, the unfortunate woman sees the stranger jump over her, approach the cash register, open it, take out bills, then return to her. Webb doesn't understand how critical her condition is but hopes to survive and decides to pretend to be dead. The maniac turns her over, and the woman tries her best not to blink, not to give herself away with pupil movement or any other reaction. She is silent when he pulls off her pants and underwear. She almost says goodbye to life when this psycho puts the pistol to her forehead and pulls the trigger. But the second shot doesn't happen. Only a click is heard, after which the psycho starts bursting into vile, simply disgusting laughter and leaves, hearing that somewhere nearby on the street a car door slammed. Just a minute later, a nice young couple enters the store. Vicky realizes she can't stand up or move but is still able to speak, so she calls the visitors for help, and they immediately call 911 and summon an ambulance and police. Amazingly, neither there nor later in the clinic does Vicky lose consciousness, and even decides to refuse surgery when doctors insist it's needed. The bullet is lodged in a large vertebra, due to which the victim is paralyzed. But she has a chance to walk again thanks to rehabilitation. While the woman fights for her life, the task force turns again to profilers with the question: could the sought serial killer have advanced in the degree of his own perversity? Previously, he never touched the victim's clothes and showed no intimate interest in them. And Vicky Webb he essentially didn't touch either, but for some reason undressed her. Experts say this is a logical continuation, as creepy as these words sound, because the principle by which he operates simply doesn't assume that the maniac will have time to do something more. He needs to come quickly and disappear just as instantly. But an unhealthy interest in what's under the pants and underwear of a woman who in theory could no longer say no to him, the psychopath could satisfy this way. When an investigator first talks to Vicky, he brings with him the composite sketches that the police managed to compile before, and the woman claims that the one who attacked her is that very man, but as if even more emaciated than in the drawings. Years pass since the first series of attacks on I-70. And the working group considers the possibility that the sought criminal could have died for some reason or is serving time for another crime. After all, he wouldn't stop on his own. That just doesn't happen. Authorities start checking convicts who externally resemble that very guy or committed something similar in their time. So, in 1995, they receive a signal from a prison in Texas. Someone clearly hints that he is responsible for the deaths of these people. Robert Craig Cox was involved in several armed robberies. In the late 70s, he was convicted for the death of a person in the Orlando area. Well, the Florida Supreme Court overturned the sentence. Robert was also arrested for kidnapping and harassment of women in California and suspected in the Springfield 3 case, a notoriously famous case of the disappearance of 3 girls in 1992, just when the series of attacks along the 70th Interstate Highway occurred. By the way, a very unusual case. If you want a big breakdown of this story, let's agree. You give 25,000 likes under this video, and I'll make a video about the Springfield 3 with all the details. Well, as you and I love, everything is in your hands. So, the police check Robert's whereabouts during that period and discover that the man did live near all these crime scenes when they were committed. However, during a meeting with detectives, Robert Cox says, "I'll tell everything when I use all my appeals." Time passes, opportunities to appeal the sentence are exhausted, but he is silent. Then Robert Craig Cox again promises to give the investigation all the information, but only when his mother dies, supposedly so the elderly and unhealthy woman doesn't get upset. She barely endured his last trial, where her son was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, when the unfortunate woman passes to the other world, Robert refuses to speak again. And in the end, investigators realize they are just being led by the nose. Perfectly aware that he won't get out of prison, the convict simply spreads rumors that he is involved in the most high-profile unsolved crimes in the region to boost his authority among other convicts. In 1996, another guy who is sitting in a federal prison in Kansas takes responsibility for what the I-70 serial killer did. However, detectives quickly realize that the young man is lying, making up details that weren't there, and so on. They think it's also for status, but later learn that their interlocutor, who was also locked up for life for serious crimes, simply wanted to get one more specific sentence: the death penalty. A few years later, by the way, he will find a way to leave life even while in confinement. At the end of the 90s, the investigation continues. No one thinks of closing it because they are still sure that if this guy is alive, he will make himself known again. And so it happens. Unfortunately, in 2001, a new attack occurs, again in the city of Terre Haute, Indiana. On the night of November 30th, a call comes to a liquor store. People say they heard shots. When the first patrol officers arrive at the scene and enter the premises, they immediately notice someone's legs at the end of the aisle. The man is lying face down on his stomach, the entire back of his head in blood, dead. The deceased is named Billy Brossman. Just recently, he moved to Terre Haute with his wife and 5-year-old child. There is a surveillance camera in the store, and this is a breakthrough as the entire scene is captured on film. A short, thin man goes to the refrigerator with beer, carries a six-pack to the cash register, pulls out a pistol. Obviously, orders Billy to give him the cash drawer. The saleswoman doesn't argue, complies. He takes the bills, but that's not enough for him. He orders the man to go to the back room. When Brossman moves away, the visitor following him simply raises his hand, points the pistol at him, shoots, and then quickly runs away. Something very familiar, right? Only no casings. However, the autopsy will show that .22 caliber bullets were used. Having video with the attacker on hand, the police turn to all media representatives and ask to spread it across America. Now, almost 10 years later, investigators say they still need public help. The Terre Haute Police, Indiana, needs your help to find the cold-blooded shooter whose brutal act was captured on camera. The footage is shown in news and numerous TV shows, including an episode of America's Most Wanted. Among the many new tips that require thorough checking, a call from a woman who claims her ex-boyfriend is the person the police have been looking for so long. Moreover, his name is mentioned by other informants too. The man lives in St. Charles, Missouri, where, by the way, Nancy Kitzmiller, the 5th victim in 1992, died. Investigators check this guy's criminal history. There are cases of fraud in cases of aggravated assaults, robberies. It also becomes known that the suspect matches other characteristics of the I-70 serial killer's profile. He traveled a lot in the Midwest, worked in construction, and therefore constantly moved between sites, and externally matches the composite sketch. Detectives from Terre Haute go to his hometown and interview him. The man admits he has been there multiple times, but not at the time of Billy Brossman's death. The last time, it seems, half a year ago or something like that. He denies any involvement in the crime, however, willingly provides contacts of his employers that he has, and agrees to provide his DNA and prints for comparison with those few traces of the alleged serial killer that the police managed to accumulate over the past years. Several months go to the laboratories issuing their conclusions. And when the hour X comes, investigators face another disappointment. He's clean, or the hairs, fingerprints found at the crime scenes belonged not to the sought person at all, but to random store visitors where he operated. Even on the pockets of Mick McCown's pants, which were cut out and seized in the hope that the maniac left his DNA when he possibly stole the unfortunate man's wallet, nothing is found. The video attack on Billy Brossman, unfortunately, also doesn't lead the police to solving the mystery. The investigation continues. The cases of the deceased are regularly reviewed, but nothing new is learned. The task force on this background completes its work. They simply have nothing left to discuss. However, there are people who still wait for justice for their relatives, and some for themselves. The only surviving victim of the I-70 serial killer, Vicky Webb, who for her daughter's sake went through a powerful rehabilitation course much faster than others. She walks, runs, lives fully. However, she remembers that a bullet is still sitting in her vertebra, which almost made her child an orphan. It is for Vicky and other people who with such difficulty learn to live without relatives and loved ones anew. A new team of detectives in 2021 again assembles a task force and from the beginning studies the materials of all cases that they previously only heard about from the news.
Indianapolis, Terre Haute, Retown, Wichita, everyone juin.
More than 29 years have passed, but the case of the I-70 shooter remains unsolved. One of the keys to solving this case is the work of the investigative team. And now it's your turn to help. The police ask for your help. A reward of $25,000 is offered for information. As soon as the department massively reminds in the news again, a 30-year-old signal surfaces. A man reported one incident to the police, but then his complaint was ignored, because on the same day Robin Fuldauer tragically died. This person worked as a foreman on a construction site that was very close to I-70. Somewhere between 2 and 3 p.m., a car drove onto the site that immediately attracted everyone's attention because it moved very chaotically. The driver jumped out of the car. He was all on edge, nervous, excited, said he was looking for work. The foreman replied that helpers are always needed, but you need to fill out a form in the work trailer, which is down the road, and offered to follow him there. The stranger agreed. The men got into their cars and set off. Arriving at the trailer, the foreman gets out of the car, turns around, and notices that a woman is sitting in the passenger seat of the strange guy. She reaches back and hands something to her friend. It's a pistol. Deciding that they were going to rob him, the frightened builder quickly jumps behind the wheel and floors the gas, and the pair chases after him. The unfortunate man manages to escape only thanks to being able to drive where the fancy Cadillac Eldorado, on which the perpetrator was chasing him, could leave wheels, suspension, and bottom. That same evening in 1992, the man learned from the news that 30 to 50 minutes before the incident, Robin Fuldauer died, who worked in a store located just 5 minutes' drive from their construction site. He also describes the strange stranger as thin, short, with reddish hair more like brown and very similar to the guy from the composite sketch. For the first time in many years, it becomes known what car exactly the criminal was driving. The foreman even recognizes the weapon that the woman handed to the accomplice before his eyes. Among many photos, he points to the Irma Werka as the most similar model. Undoubtedly, the investigation now wants to find out who the companion accompanying the psychopath was and her degree of involvement in everything he did. But first, they need to search for the car. The witness says it had Florida plates. At the same time, all evidence collected before in the cases of the deceased is sent again for analysis. 20 years have passed since Billy Brossman's death and their first check. Technologies have advanced, and who knows, maybe with their help it will still be possible to extract a DNA profile from those same casings that the criminal definitely touched personally. This will help check a few more tips on suspicious people, as well as try to run him through the existing database. So many hopes work. Searching for all suitable Cadillac models registered in Florida takes months, as does processing physical evidence in the cases. But no result. The guilty person's identity is not revealed to this day. Considering these people's efforts in vain would be blasphemy. They didn't bring Vicky Webb and the families of the deceased the long-awaited justice, but supported them and made them feel that people around are not indifferent. The police authorities care about their fates. Sometimes evil is more cunning and sly. However, don't forget, cases that for some reason become so-called cold cases in the USA are never closed. And if good and justice are destined to happen, it will happen. Subscribe to our channel for updates on this case and more gripping mysteries that expose the darkest corners of humanity.